Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Mariana Souto-Manning. I am president of Erikson Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this wonderful event. I am really honored to host this panel tonight in collaboration with the Administration for Children and Families. And this incredible panel will be discussing nurturing and strengthening the early childhood workforce. What could be more important at this time, especially at a time in which we know that caregivers and parents are experiencing extremely high levels of stress, and that is impacting negatively how children develop. So, as you know, Erikson was founded to address the workforce development of Head Start teachers way back, and Head Start has always prioritized making sure that children who live in divested communities have the best professionals working with them. Today we continue the work of developing workforce in communities that have been disinvested, really trying to undo some of the wrongs and making sure that we are not dismembering kids, but that kids across abilities, across languages, whether they're official languages or languaging practices, are all able to shine in classrooms. That we prepare teachers who are knowledgeable and can teach the whole child and can build on their strengths. That really continues to serve as our compass today. And so today we're going to be invited to think differently, because the typical child, the global majority, is the child across abilities, is the child of color, is the child who is multilingual, even though day in and day out in classrooms, preschool centers, many times they're treated as lesser than. So how do we prepare teachers, the workforce, how do we educate them to become believers, true believers in the brilliance of every child? How do we make sure that they continue to grow? That beginning workforce preparation is the entry to a profession. And that as teachers, you never cease to learn. As early childhood professionals, you're always developing alongside children. And finally, that we remain members of the workforce. We know that there are so many challenges, and we know that many professionals leave before they are able to master the task of building on the strength of children, of really making sure that the light in their eyes never dim. What certain supports need to be in place, especially in a profession that is stressful, under-resourced, underpaid, and often unrecognized, at least in this country. We know that there is a lot of investment, and that workforce preparation and early childhood education is an investment in the future and in the public. So you are going to hear from incredible leaders in the early childhood space about innovative ways to partner so that we can nurture and strengthen the early childhood workforce. Many times we tend to blame teachers, caregivers, as if they were the silver bullet, as if there weren't inequities in communities, as if there weren't extremely high levels of stress being experienced in the home. But not because of that, but in spite of that, how can we make sure that we foster connections with the teachers, and that the teachers foster connections with kids, with community members, in ways that are long-lasting and ways that have a positive impact in their development. So with that, it is my incredible pleasure to pass it over and introduce Angela Green, the Regional Administrator for the Administration of Children and Families of Region 5 in Chicago, where she oversees high-priority human services initiatives of the agency, as well as administrative leadership. She can tell you much more, and I encourage you to take the time to get to meet her. But you're not here to hear what I'm saying. I'll pass it on to Angela so that we can get to this amazing panel.
Thank you, President Mariana Souto-Manning. Thank you so much. And thank you, Erikson, for the ability to use this beautiful place. Tell you, we just moved into our space, but I'd rather be here. and I'm going to be here with you all. So thank you. And I also want to just take a moment to extend my thanks also to John Fallon, if you don't mind raising his hand, who was able to take my dream and get the right partners and make it happen. And I can't leave out Maria and Sheila and Allison for Erikson. Thank you so much for your work. If you would not have been there helping us and kind of pushing us forward and taking the lead with us, we would not be here, not a question. So thank you so much. Yeah. So beyond Dr. Souto-Manning's leadership as Erikson president, I particularly appreciate how your scholarship, when it comes to focusing on defining what equity really means, I take that to heart. And I thank you for the work that you put out there. On day one, President Biden and Vice President Harris, the administration focused on equity, not just for one agency, but for all of government. And that became our charge. And I had the privilege of playing a key role within the Administration for Children and Families within ACF as the external engagement strategy, be able to develop that for the agency on equity. You know, defining equity in our context was extremely crucial, but equally important is reducing the structural barriers that block safety, health, and well-being, and ensuring that everyone can have access to ACF services. If you'd like to know more, because my time is limited, about the work that we've done on equity, I put it up there. I don't have the best writing, but it's acf.hhs.gov/equity. And you'll see all the work that is external engagement work that we've done, and you can learn about each one of our program officers and where their charge is and what they're taking to heart and trying to change. So we also believe at ACF that a strong, stable, and diverse early care and educational ECE workforce is key for the development of children and families' well-being. Now, unfortunately, as Dr. Souto-Manning has mentioned, early childhood programs across the country are really grappling with workforce challenges, a problem that was only worsened by the pandemic. But early educators do the important work of caring for our youngest learners, but are being paid wages that are far below other sectors. So this leaves parents struggling, as we know, to find care, and it also puts more pressure on those who remain in the field. And ACF is definitely committed to addressing this crisis and tackling the long-standing inequities that exist in ECE workforce, which we know is primarily composed of women and largely composed of women of color. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've done within ACF, and we still have a lot of work left ahead. I'd like to share a few recent steps that ACF has taken to advance equity in the early childhood workforce. So last year, we launched the National Early Care and Education Workforce Center, which combines $30 million over 5 years in technical assistance and research funds across ACF programs to support the advancement of early care and education workforce. The center is a joint research and technical assistance investment, working to spur innovation through data-informed solutions and strategies. We have identified and we're amplifying sustainable approaches to increasing compensation and benefits, and they will also work with our states and local leaders to support efforts to implement and improve workforce strategies. Just this past February, ACF issued a final rule, which was improving childcare access, affordability, and stability in CCDF. This rule helps lower childcare costs for families by prohibiting cost payments above 7% of their income, and making it easier for states and territories to cover co-pays for many families. It also stabilizes payment practices for child care providers and simplifies the eligibility process for families. So I'm happy to note that we do have one of our leaders here in the Office of Child Care, Gina Miller-Chung, who's a co-director for regional operations for the Office of Child Care. Even though she's in DC, she lives here in Chicago, so you mind raising your hand. We also have two of the regional program specialists, Dina Evans and Margaret Jordan, with us today as well. Thank you. in August, ACF issued another important rule aimed at supporting the Head Start workforce and improving the quality of Head Start services. This rule sets federal requirements for wages and benefits, which will increase wages for most Head Start teacher annual salaries by about $10,000. It also improves mental health integration into Head Start programming. And I don't know if Karen is, excellent. I want to introduce you all to Karen McNamara. She is our regional program director for our Office of Head Start. I'm just waiting to see. So we have some of our best in the room with you. As Dr. Souto-Manning has pointed out in her own work, innovation and equity are sometimes considered these buzzwords, right? But I tell you, we take it to heart in ACF. We know that meaningful innovation won't just support economic ability of individuals affected by inequity, they also address the policies, the practices, and the system that perpetuate inequity, and that's what we're hoping to do with ACF. A big part of our role as a regional administrator for the Administration for Children and Families is to help create spaces like this for states and communities to share and explore meaningful innovations that drive equity forward. On that front, I'd like to share just one of the things we just recently done. In my office, we had a project we co-did it with McCormick Foundation. I see Brian in the room. Gotta holler out my partners. But early this month, we co-hosted a 2-day summit for human service leaders from our 6-state region. The summit focused on innovative policy approaches that support the well-being of expectant parents and parents of young children. And just this last week, I was able to take our ACF Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Jeff Hield to visit one of those new policy approaches in Flint, Michigan. It's called RX Kids. If you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to look it up. This program is one of the most innovative uses of our TANF funds and philanthropic dollars in the country. It's providing direct cash assistance to pregnant moms and their babies, and it's designed to address the financial needs of families during the most critical period of a child's birth, which we know often leads to a significant drop in a family's income. So I appreciate this opportunity to engage with you all today, and including those of you who are from the states or our local government or from our programs within the community. I thank you so much for being here. I do recognize that it is definitely taking us to have a clear path forward through investing in ECU workforce, and it's needed at every level of government. So I'm now going to turn over to another government partner from the state of Illinois, Dr. Teresa Ramos. But I do want to take a moment just to recognize some of the work that you are doing in Illinois. The Principal Administration has definitely provided a comprehensive early childhood education pathway forward, and including Smart Start Illinois. Just excited about the work you're doing, the efforts that you're doing, making definite changes for families and children throughout the state. You try to compete with, was it Minnesota, trying to be the best state for families?
Of course.
So I'll now turn over to Dr. Teresa Ramos, with Governor J.B. Pritzker's first Assistant Deputy Governor for Education. Here.
I'm setting my timer. Can you hear me? I'm close enough to the mic. Okay, great. So I'm first assistant deputy governor. What that means of education, it means I work with the deputy governor to support our education agencies, early childhood, K-12, the State Board of Education, the Community College Board, Student Assistance Commission, which does financial aid and scholarship processing, Board of Higher Education, and then we work to source candidates for all of the other university boards. So I say that because I want to just level set. I am not an early childhood expert. I worked for a couple years at Illinois Action for Children. I worked for 7 years at Advance Illinois, where I built coalitions to do really hard things. If I had an expertise, it would be like, how do you do really hard things that no one wants to do? Like advance an equitable school funding formula that took us from the worst, most inequitable school funding formula to one of the best, and figure out how to get commitments to add that on. So that was my previous work in education policy, but I grew up in Chicago. I went to Chicago Public Schools, and my 4-year-old, who was up at 5 a.m. this morning, has just started pre-K 4. So that's a little bit about me. I want to spend a few minutes just talking about what we're doing and why this is an exciting moment in Illinois and why I'm excited to learn from everybody on this panel. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has made historic investments in early childhood and public education. In just the last 2 fiscal years in Smart Start Illinois, we've added $417 million into early childhood services. That does not count the rest of the continuum, and it undercounts things. That's just Smart Start Illinois. It's not what we do in CCAP. It's not what we do in EI. It's not what we're doing in evidence-based funding. We've made major investments in early childhood in Illinois with general revenue funds. And I say that because, like, to do hard things, it's not just what do we do in early childhood, but how do we get the dollars to do it? How do we wrangle with other folks who think their thing is the most important priority and bring everyone along? And I think folks know we just passed legislation establishing a new state agency for early childhood, the new Illinois Department of Early Childhood. It has a $14 million budget this year. And what we learned from other states as we tried to be the best state in the nation by learning from all of them and listening, as we gave ourselves a 2-year ramp really to figure out what to do before services transition. And we are not thinking about this as a 2-year transition. We are thinking about this as getting a 2-year head start on what will probably be a decades-long transition that will require some of the work that gets surfaced in the next 2 years to be implemented for many years to come, right? But at that 2-year mark, we're going to take programs and funding streams from the State Board of Education, from Department of Children and Family Services and Department of Human Services, and they will be housed at this new Department of Early Childhood. So we're setting priorities, we're listening. You know, our kind of high level is to make the system simpler, which I think is achievable for everybody. Making it better, which I think is, you know, also achievable for everybody, and fairer, which means really thinking about who do we have to prioritize, who could the state do better at serving. And we started this transition, and I'll just say, like, when I came into the governor's office almost 3 years ago, this was taking up the mantle of funding commission recommendations, figuring out how to present this option to the governor, what resources did we need, how do we agree that this is what we needed to do, and work it through the life cycle to get transition directors, get some capacity. But that started with centering anti-racist design, because we knew we needed to do it better and that we needed to bring in expertise in how to engage parents and families and center anti-racist processes. So we did that. We brought in Shy by Design, who helped us really think about how do we do this better. And we built on that by saying we're going to center families with young children with special needs and multilingual families, because we think if we do this, our belief is we will actually make the system better for everyone if we center those two groups in an anti-racist process. And that's kind of what we've embarked. So I know the panelists know this, that those are our priorities even when we think about the workforce. And I'm eager to hear, you know, kind of the experience, research, and innovative projects this group is working on as we get through the panel, because there's a lot for us to learn. So with that, I think we're going to start on one end or the other and have folks introduce themselves and have a couple of minutes, and then we'll ask questions of the panel.
Great. I don't have a mic, but I'll talk really loud. This one? Okay. All right, let's see. It's on, okay. So hi everyone, I'm Juliet Bromer, and I'm a research professor here at Erikson, where I direct the Home-Based Child Care Research Initiative. Been doing that for about 16 years, but I've been working in the area of home-based child care for more than 25 years. And we conduct research at the local, state, and national levels. We work with federal partners, state partners, communities, to really look at issues related to the home-based child care workforce. We look at issues around quality, supply, sustainability, as well as access issues and families' experiences who use home-based child care and who rely on that form of care. For those of you who aren't as familiar, home-based child care is the most prevalent type of non-parental child care in the United States for children ages 0 to 12. So some of our current research includes a current policy partnership we have with IDHS, University of Chicago, and Illinois Action for Children, studying non-traditional hour child care in Illinois, which we know takes place mostly in home-based settings. with OPRE, which is a division of ACF. We are currently finishing up a 4-state qualitative study of what quality looks like in family, friend, and neighbor care settings. And we have a long, many-year project looking at home-based child care networks and how they can support the workforce. And we also have been doing some work on pre-K and home-based child care. So I'm glad to be here today with you all.
Hi everyone, my name is LaTonya Jones. I am a early learning site director in the North Lawndale flagship site at the Carole Robertson Center for Learning. I started this journey 20 years ago as a volunteer parent, had the opportunity to participate in a workforce program where I got the great learning experience inside the classrooms as well as early childhood education coursework to get me started on my way as a educator for young children. And so even with that being said, I finished the workforce program with a letter of certificate, and then I continue my education. So it wasn't the end of the workforce program, it was actually the beginning of my educational career in this field. And so I went from there to, and all with the help of the Carole Robertson Center for Learning and their opportunity that they provided for me, I actually got a CDA in preschool education. I also got AA at the Harold Washington College. And then I was able from a teacher's aide, but I became a teacher's assistant. So I was going up in my career as well as get the education that I needed to become an educator for young children. And then I went from there to Kendall College, where I received the BA. Yes, and then I became a lead teacher at the Carole Robertson Center for Learning. I went from there at Walden University, where I received a master's degree. These degrees allowed me to have the opportunity to move up in my career, and I became an infant toddler coordinator for early childhood education, of course, but I became a site director. Assistant site director before that, but a site director. And so the journey is continuing. Every day I'm learning, every day I'm growing, and every day I get a chance to work with our kiddos every day who's teaching me as well as I'm teaching them. So it's an exchange for the good. And the workforce program was wonderful. Now, coming even to this day now, we have Transform Ed. Back then it was a handful of people. Now we're able to service more individuals who wants to be in this field and wants to learn and wants to grow. So we have the resources, or there are many resources, and there got to be continuing resources. So I'm here to say we need these resources out here. There are so many people that's undecided what they want to do, or they're afraid about what they can do. But parents, as educators, parents are the first teachers. And so with that being said, we need to have those resources for them so that they can have a success story as I do today.
I don't know how I ended up having to follow you. This is just cruel, you know, this ain't right. But Ms. Jones, your story is actually something that sort of inspired me in my work over all of these years. I'm Kathy Main, and I'm on the faculty in the College of Education at the University of Illinois Chicago. I'm also the director of the early childhood programs there and a member of our collaborative for young children and families. For 30 years, I have been doing work around teacher preparation for folks like Ms. Jones, I like to think, across the entire range, though also a few innovations that I thought today that I would share with you. One is our alternative licensure program that we've now been running. This is version 2. I've actually been running alternative pathways for folks to get teacher licensure since 2007, when I first recognized what a challenge it was and the situation we had in our state around access and opportunity for people to get a teacher license. Our current version, we are about to complete our 5th cohort in December, so we're close to about 175 folks who've come through the program. This program is completely dependent and in partnership with the Chicago Early Learning Workforce Scholarship, which I think is critical, and I can talk so much about the impact of scholarships with regard to really moving the needle on the early childhood workforce. We have a lot of evidence from our program because we also had a robust evaluation of showing that not only is quality of instruction improving around particularly things like social emotional learning, emotional focused teaching, and STEM, we're also seeing really significant shifts in compensation from this scholarship program and our program combined. So I'm super excited about that. I want to keep talking about that and keep champion scholarship programs for the incumbent workforce because they matter and they make a huge difference. I'll also add another innovation we're working on right now. UIC is currently the intermediary or sponsor for an apprenticeship program, and we're really sort of excited about this. This is our really looking at a systems change level versus a scholarship or our innovative program like our alternative licensure. This is really looking at changing the system and how we do this, and I think the most important innovation in this is our engagement with the employer. We never really always, on the institution of higher ed side, we didn't always engage the employer, and we're realizing how critical it is to actually collaborate and connect with employers. And so I hope we get to talk a little bit more about that model, and I don't want to take up more time. So with that, I will pass it over to Bela.
Thank you, everybody. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bela Moté. I'm the president and CEO of the Carole Robertson Center for Learning. And could we just give it up for LaTonya one more time? She makes everything that I have the privilege of talking about a reality. So I've been the CEO for the last 6 years. The organization has grown tremendously in that time, but just for those of you who may not know Carole Robertson Center, we think of ourselves in kind of 3 pieces. There's the direct service, there's the community partners that we work with, and then there's how does data inform the way that we innovate, the way that we think about scaling and disseminating? So some of the things that we're talking about today, I will share a little bit more. But my journey actually started as an early childhood teacher. And I started as an assistant teacher right out of college, and it was right when the brain science was coming out, and it transformed my entire life. And now that I think about, like, how did I get into this? I was just sharing with Juliet that my mother was what we would call an FFN, a family friend and neighbor person. So, you know, Malvika Pandya always had kids in her house, right? After school, before school, and then the little ones. And so I got immersed in early childhood very, very quickly. I have done almost everything that you can imagine in the early childhood space. From being a teacher, an assistant teacher, to a site director, to a curriculum specialist, to whatever you call it when you're responsible for many site directors under you, and then moved into administrative roles that helped me realize how vital the private sector and philanthropy was. And so got very curious about it and spent a bit of my career working with foundations, and then moved into systems building at the national and international levels. So one might say, well, you're back here in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, and like Teresa, I'm a product of the Chicago Public Schools, and feel very passionate as a child who English is not my first language. I sometimes still don't think in English, and I think about the 70s and the 80s when my family was navigating the education space and how challenging it was. So when we think about Carole Robertson Center, I want you to hold a couple of things. I want you to hold the 350 plus direct service staff that we have that serve our children prenatal to 18 years of age, the bulk of them being 5 and under. Then I want you to think about sort of the community spread that we have, because we are in the city of Chicago, and we have a network of home-based providers, family child care providers, 23 of them. We have 6 smaller center providers. We are in schools, what we call micro centers, so we run preschool classrooms in charter schools, and then we have home visiting. So we do everything that you can imagine that really thinks about how do you deepen early childhood in a community, from as far south to as far north as West Rogers Park, or West Ridge rather. So we cover that gamut. We always ask the questions. Innovation is something that I think has always been part of the early childhood landscape, but we didn't always call it that, right? So we have a million good ideas. The LaTonyas of the world have 1,000,001 good ideas every day, right? The difference is we cannot access private dollars or public dollars as fast as corporations can. And so as we think about this conversation in innovation, the way that and we've had some really great things from our kindergarten readiness, and I want to give Brian and McCormick Foundation a shout out for believing in that and some of the work that's there to transform ed, which is our apprenticeship model that creates the workforce, to how we think about data. Those are all innovations that we've been able to think about, strengthen, but with the fundamental question of what is the white space that Carole Robertson Center can help fill for the sector? Because of our size, because of the breadth and depth of our work, we have a responsibility for that, right? And so that's part and parcel of how we think about those pillars, right? The direct service, the community partners, and then how we use data to inform some of those practices and shift policies. So with that, I will turn it over to Sandra.
Hi everyone, my name is Sandra Osorio. I'm a professor and director of teacher licensure here at the Erikson Institute. The teacher licensure program here at the Erikson Institute is a triple endorsement where individuals that go through our program come out with an early childhood and English as a second language. They can get a bilingual endorsement if they speak another language, and then special education. They're able to complete this program in either a year at a full-time rate or 2 years at a part-time rate, in either a hybrid, which has on-campus and online modality, or fully online. And so we support individuals that are part of our program through an educator impact grant that provides that funding, the full tuition for them to be able to participate in the program, and then also supports them post-graduation with the professional learning community for 2 years, so that we continue to support them post-graduation in that transition into their possibly new position as they move up, right, in the educational trajectory. So excited to be here and have part of the discussion. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna ask some questions, and I think there's gonna be time for other questions. But LaTonya, I'd like to start with you. I think the question we talked about was, what are some of the biggest challenges for women who want to be early childhood educators? Or even just hearing what you've said, like, what do you wish was easier or faster on your journey?
What I would say is having the resources or the knowledge of those resources. And a lot of times you hear those conversations when you're asking why you're not going forward in your education and different things like that. And a lot of time is not having the finances, being, you have books that you have to get, you have supplies you have to get, and I don't have the money, a lot of them say, or child care, there's a lot of times where you have to go to school after you work, a lot of time, I went to school after I worked, had full-time in the household, and then I had full-time at work, and then I had to go to school. So I don't have anyone else. So a lot of those challenges taking place when you're don't have the resources or don't know how to tap into those resources.
Maybe this is a good segue to Kathy, which we had a prep call and I asked a bunch of questions about apprenticeship, and Kathy sent me a very long email that I read twice to prepare for this conversation. Would you, I'm sure I'll be reading it for a long time and referring back to it. Kathy, would you maybe share a little bit more about the apprenticeship program and what it has the potential to solve for employers and also for the student employees, given what we've heard about LaTonya's story and just what we know from your work in supporting educators on this pathway?
Sure, I can try, and I want to build off of what LaTonya was saying of how she was working during the day and then going to school at night and then figuring out how it was paid for. And sometimes it was about not having the right information and not having the right resources. And I think the potential of the apprenticeship model is to integrate all of those things together. So your employer knows that you're going to school. So they are thinking about what are the supports that we need to be providing for you to make this a place of continuous professional development for you. Your institution of higher ed, which under the apprenticeship model is called your related technical instruction or whatever, understands that you're actually working somewhere and you have children in front of you. The best kind of coursework, assignments, things that you're going to have in your experience are going to be knitted together around your experiences in your work. So those are sort of the things that we keep sort of thinking about. And then we're also looking to how you can, the thing about apprenticeship, it kind of comes, you get to earn while you learn, right? And so one of the things in my work that I noticed around licensure was the biggest barrier, believe it or not, in all of the evaluations we've done was not tuition, was not the content test, but it was like, I can't leave my job. No one wants to leave their job. And so recognizing of how to figure out to support people while they're working, get the advanced credentials and degrees. And I think the piece in the apprenticeship that I think is so exciting is in our model, we're really trying to build up and support the site-based mentor, because we think that site-based mentor is sort of a critical component of how we help people learn. That person's there. It's not about compliance. It's not somebody coaching you about compliance. It's not somebody coaching you around a specific Eckers or, it's about somebody who has a relationship that's invested in your learning and your development. It's, reflective supervision, and it's what we also call at UIC a lot, it's about parallel processes. You're with someone who supports you and thinks about you in the same way they want you to think about children and their families. So I think did I answer? Go ahead.
Yes, but I want to just dig in on that.
Okay.
I can't leave my job. Okay. So the barrier being, in order to finish the degree to get to that next job, they would have to leave their job. I just want to make sure I fully understand, and everybody fully understands. What does that mean?
So in traditional student teaching programs in the Illinois State Board of Ed, where to earn a professional educator license, often you would have to go and you'd have to student teach somewhere. But about 15 years ago, we worked really hard to change the rules in Illinois State Board of Ed to allow, it first started with early childhood because we're the leaders, and now it's across the board everywhere, where you can actually remain employed while you're student teaching. And then the Illinois State Board of Ed also started opening up things like residency, which I use a residency model. And so again, you stay where you're working and we come to you. We support you and we coach you, and you don't have to leave your job. But for years, and the word kind of still is on the street, that people are like, I'm not going for this additional license because I don't want to have to leave my job. And don't get me wrong, I will say this is more complicated and more expensive. I've been in this field for a really long time, and it used to be really great when I could say, LaTonya, I got the best mentor for you. You're going to go over and you're going to work at XYZ school, and this is what's going to happen. Versus me coming to LaTonya where she's working and figuring out how to support her.
I'm going to then switch over to you, Sandra, because it's really helpful, and I hope we can ask more questions, but I know we're going to take some time for the audience to source questions too. as the state prioritizes multilingual families, everything that you're doing, as we prioritize everything that you're doing, how can that translate into better, how does that translate, or how can it translate to better recruitment and retention in teacher prep programs? And I'm curious, like, if we're adding more to folks' plate as they get these additional specializations that we deeply need? Is there potential to take anything off the plate of teachers as they go through this preparation process?
Great question. I think we just have to get creative in teacher education. And so one of the ways that Erikson Institute did it in their teacher licensure program is that we integrated all of these endorsements across the courses. So in a typical teacher education program, what you'll see like a bilingual education course over here, a special education course over here, but then it's up to the student to figure out, how do I integrate this, right? If I have a child that's both multilingual and has identified disabilities. And so what we did in our program is we're talking about this, all the endorsements across all the courses. And so it just gets deeper and deeper as they move through the program. So we really got to rethink how we do teacher education. We also have to think about, going back to the resources, how do we provide educators and teachers support? So in our teacher licensure program, we do a cohort model, which means individuals are moving through the program together as a group. So they not only have the community of the faculty support, but they also have building community within themselves, right, to be able to support them, each other. And then I think it's what everyone said, building off of what Kathy said, we're also, when we come to practicum, a lot of our students are completing their practicum placements in the locations where they are employed. We want to make sure that if they're already working in underinvested communities, that we're not removing them to go somewhere else. We need them there, but we need to be able to develop them. And so we've really worked with our practicum coordinator to make sure we're able to support them in the location they're employed.
I'm going to ask you this follow-up question, and then I'm going to come to you, Juliet. Is there something that you think the state can do that, as we prioritize it, that would help with teacher recruitment and retention, especially in multilingual endorsement or supporting children with special needs?
Yeah, I think it's just about, of course, it always comes down to funding, right? Funding is the never-ending thing of being able to fund programs such as this, so that we're able to have more educators go through programs and be supported and not come out with lots of, payment dues and all that.
Got it. I do not have answers on funding, so that's a conversation we're just starting. So, in case anybody is thinking of those questions, questions are directed at the panelists, not the moderator. Juliet, can you share a little bit about what unique challenges and opportunities face the early childhood home-based childcare workforce?
Sure. So there are many challenges. I guess we'll start with the challenges and then end with the opportunities. We know that the challenges were really highlighted during the pandemic, and actually this is starting with an opportunity. So many programs had to close their doors during the pandemic, but many home-based childcare providers we know stayed open. They had no choice to stay open, and they really were truly heroes and essential workers and all those things. But what it did was sort of shine a light on how essential they are, and yet they continue to close and not be able to make it. And that, I'm talking about the licensed sector, which is much smaller than the millions of family, friend, and neighbor caregivers that we have, who we don't talk enough about. But in terms of the licensed sector, we did a study starting at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020 to try to understand, because even before the pandemic, family child care programs were closing. And we wanted to understand what were the factors behind what was happening. And what we learned, we did many focus groups with hundreds of providers across 4 states, not Illinois, but we think some of the things we heard are likely the case for providers here as well, was that there are really these intersecting factors that are challenges for folks. There's economic challenges of the work. It is hard to make a decent living doing child care, and we know that. Compensation is a huge issue across the field, even more so in home-based child care. That intersects with working conditions of childcare. In home-based childcare, it's long hours, it's often working alone, it's caring for mixed age groups, which can be a wonderful opportunity, but also challenging. And it's balancing the home and the childcare, both the spaces and the relationships. And so those things, plus the third intersecting challenge are systems. So it's wonderful, amazing that Illinois is choosing to, consolidate and have one department of early education. But what so many providers face across the country is not that. They face multiple systems and funding sources and regulations and standards that sometimes conflict to meet 3 sets of standards that don't even align. Or they have people coming from licensing into their homes who don't understand that they're not a child care center. And so we just heard from the field the immense burdens around complying and participating in these systems that were not designed for homes. And so together these things intersect to create challenges to sort of exacerbate the inequities that this sector faces. So those are some of the challenges. I would say we're also learning increasingly more about housing constraints and just some of the work of home-based childcare that's invisible that we don't think about. On the opportunities side, I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities of the workforce and then some of the supports that I think are really exciting and innovative. So home-based childcare providers, many of them do this work because they have an incredible commitment and calling to the work. And actually tomorrow here at Erikson, I'm facilitating a panel of 3 home-based childcare educators for the Executive Fellows Program. And we did this last year, and it was like the most impactful thing that the fellows heard, because these women are so, if you want anyone to come and tell you about the value of early childhood, talk to a family child care provider, because they have dedicated their life to this work and they see it as a calling. But they are small business owners. They are an asset in their neighborhood and their community. They're community developers, right? One of the, I'd say, innovations and opportunities that we've been working on in our research is what are some innovative supports that could really recognize the strengths and the wonderful assets of this workforce, as well as start to address some of the challenges. And so for many years, we've been doing research on networks, which is broadly defined as an organization that brings groups of home-based childcare providers together and offers them a menu of supports that are strength-based and responsive and culturally and linguistically responsive and affirming. And so we have recently put out with the Homegrown Collaborative a set of benchmarks for networks that we think states and funders can use to say this is what high-quality support looks like for the home-based childcare sector. Right? Because not all support is the same, and so we've put out these guidelines, and we're now gathering data about how states are using these guidelines, and we've put out a bunch of resources on networks and just continuing to learn from the field about how they're innovating. And actually the use of networks is in the final rule, and it was in the final rule, it was in the rule before that about as a promising strategy for states to use.
I appreciate that. I could literally ask you guys questions for hours about this, and I might come back to a question not on here, which is like, what would you want the state to know right now as we are framing this process for a transition, and what would you want us to prioritize if you could? So we'll come back to that. But in your opinion, Bela, what are some of the root causes of inequity in pay that you've seen? And if you want to share a little bit about how you might tackle that, we'd appreciate that too.
So just a clarification, with home-based or just writ large?
Writ large.
Okay, so I think we're friends here, right? I think we have to call out the 800-pound elephant they weigh a lot more than that. So the 800-pound gorilla. So it's the way that this sector was created. We have to recognize that it has always been on the backs of women, and it started on the backs of women who were slaves. right? That's what we have to remember. Every sector starts some way, somehow. And so we are still very much in repair mode. And it's only until recently that we've brought awareness to this really tainted part of our history. So I think we have to just call it for that. And so I have to wear my employer hat right now. The first thing that we all know is the most important asset of any employer's way to work is its people, it's its workforce. So when you have a workforce that has been historically underserved, underpaid, and diminished time and again, as Carole Robertson Center, we have to think about what burdens do we have to remove, what access points do we have to create, and how do we not only build the pipeline, but how do we retain? And I think that that's a really important conversation for us to have, is that we can't spend all of this time and energy and focus on building a pipeline only for a few years later people feeling like that choice that they made or that employer that they went to wasn't the right fit, or they just leave the sector, right? Because then you're in constant churn. So I wanted to call that out, and I think the more times that we can kind of say it aloud, the more we're appreciative of the past, because you got to look in the rear view to figure out where to go forward. I'd also say that I think we just devalue women's work. And this industry is women's work. That's what it's been labeled as. And so that recognition, I think, is also really, really important. We've talked about a lot of the things, but I think there's a couple of things that I encourage us to hold on to, certainly at Carole Robertson Center, that fill me with optimism. We joke quite a bit about being delusionally optimistic, and I think it's important, right, to be delusionally optimistic. Otherwise, that wine out there might take the whole new meaning for us. Whole new meaning. So there's a couple of things, right? We spend a lot of time, as we should, thinking about the folks that are right in front of children every single day. And what do they need? But oftentimes, what we're also seeing is when you see an op-ed in the New York Times or you see literature, it's about the kids who aren't doing well, the children who aren't coming and showing up. There's more IEPs than ever before. What's getting left out is, where's the workforce in that conversation? If the kids have had just compounded effects of COVID, so have our workforce. And so for Carole Robertson Center, who is committed to hiring from the communities that we serve, for all of the reasons we know matter, we also have to recognize that we have a responsibility to sort of unburden some of those realities, right? So that their gifts can come with full shine as they're meant to. The part that I would ask us to think about as the next frontier of innovation, and something that we're thinking a lot about at Carole Robertson Center, sorry for those who I was talking to in the hallway about this, is the LaTonya level of management, that site leader. Because I think that is, we know that they're the gatekeepers of quality, they're the arbiters of relationships with the community, they build up or possibly tear down the workforce that is in their sites. And so we have to get our arms around that piece. We have a site where it's taken us more than 7 months to find a site leader, a site director. And so we have to, I think those are two pieces, Teresa and all, that we have to really think about in the creation of what does an innovation around that look like. I will also just build on what Juliet said with home-based particularly. For us, we have 23 family child care providers. The key is that it is not a one-to-one translation, that one home-based provider is not one center-based provider, right? And we don't know how, as a sector just yet, to really think about not making everything apples to apples, but really thinking about that small business owner and what are some things that we can creatively look to in corporate small business America that really could translate. Again, building on the innovations that Juliet described, if that makes sense. And isolation is the number one thing. So that network piece, when you are the Jill of all trades in your house and you're thinking about how you keep your lights on, what you're going to feed the kiddos, if they go to sleep, what can you get done in that time? And then you have a lot of those administrative burdens that are just that much more amplified. And the last thing that I would say is that the biggest responsibility, again, wearing my employer hat, which is also like an identity crisis, right? Because like I'm a provider, I'm an employer, I'm the compliance officer, because we got early Head Start and preschool for all and all these kinds of things. But what I would just say is that the investing in has to be very tangible. So there's compensation, absolutely, that we have to continue to work on, and the benefits piece of it. But there's also, how do you actually think about one's growth and development? And that really starts with listening. So that Transform Ed, that is now part of the state's apprenticeship model, really came from a need at Carole Robertson Center. We received 2 back-to-back, and I think Karen's gone. I was going to give her a shout out. No, Karen from Region 5, sorry. Yes, Karen, to you too. But we received 2 federal back-to-back grants during COVID. And all of a sudden, we had written this beautiful proposal. We were like, we're gonna have 3 teachers in every room, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at Ashley like, oh my God, where are they gonna come from, right? And it wasn't because we were churning teachers and they were leaving. It was actually we needed to hire more people. And so what we decided, and I want to give Ashley, I'm giving a lot of shout outs today, I want to give Ashley a shout out, because the apprenticeship model is really the brainchild of our programs team, who really listen to our frontline staff and our middle tier site leadership to say, what does that look like? So in our apprenticeship model, they don't spend all of their time just in a classroom. There's foundational learning, 20 hours a week, that they actually spend outside getting that support, and they take that back into the classroom. So people ask us, so you pay them if they're not in the classroom, even though, and we're like, we do. We do pay them, right? So the listening part of how we think about innovation and supporting the fundamentals of just how are you a good employer, you know? We can't lose that, and I think that that's what has to get translated in the way that we invest and we innovate.
I appreciate that so much, and I think we're probably good for
one more question.
One more question. I might just want to piggyback on something you said, because I appreciate that, like, being good at listening as a really important part to this transition process. Like, the most important thing we can do right now is just listen. And so resonates deeply with me, because I think state agencies can figure out how to do that too. The last question I'll ask for folks is just, as you think about what the most important things are for your educators, those frontline folks, to know and be able to do. Like, when you look at who you're bringing in, what are those, like, if you could distill it down, and it doesn't have to just be, I'm going to start with you, Bela, as employer, and LaTonya, but if other folks, like, what are those important things that they just need to know and be able to do to be successful in those first kind of years of the profession?
That's a big question, Teresa. Sorry. So I will spare us all from all of the important skills about brain development and all that. What I would say, for me, it boils down to 2 things, right? You have to know that this job includes working with families. That it is rule number 1. It is not just working with the child. And then the other thing is that you have to actually work in a team. Like, physically, you know, you are in a center-based program or in a school, you have layers of teams that you work with. So there's your team in a classroom if you're an educator who is in a center-based or in a school, but then there's the family support team, and then there's the mental health team, and then there's, you know, folks, community partners who come in. So that teamwork and the family part, absolutely, I would underscore. And I think, you know, building off of Sandra, what you said, and Teresa, I think we also have to have a workforce that has the agility and the nimbleness, and those 2 things to me are tacked to inclusivity and welcoming. So you cannot be rigid in your ways of when you think about the demographics of a community changing, or a different way. You know, ACF has a great idea and they want us to try it. You can't be rigid in that.
Appreciate that.
Yep.
And I agree with Bela. An educator must have that ability to communicate with our families, because they have that home piece that connects to the school piece, that we can understand the child even the more, you know. And so that partnership with our families helps us to make sure we're meeting the needs of the children. They may be, educators must be able to relate to our children. That's how we learn their interests, their needs, being able to communicate with them. We are the ones that's helping them to grow. We scaffold their learning, their ability, what they already have within them. And we are the ones as educators scaffold that, and we build on it by giving those wonderful activities every day that enhance their learning. So I believe that it is really important to make those connections that we need. Inside the classroom, outside the classroom. I'm always in and outside the classroom every day. So I'm making those connections because it makes the child whole. We become whole to help support their learning. And then help parents as well to understand what we do. We're not babysitters at all. We are educators. And sometimes they think that. But when we help them to understand that all that we do and how children learn through play, learn through the environment that we create every day, they'll see the value in which we're doing every day.
Anybody else want to jump in before we turn over to the audience?
I'll go just real quick on this, because in all my years of working with students, you know, they come, I want to work with children, and I'm like, well, this is about working with adults. I can't echo like how important it is that you have to work with families, and your team is so critical. But people who know me know that I do this thing with groups all the time, and it's like, is it patience or is it knowledge? And it's knowledge. There's a knowledge base here, and we could go on and on of what the actual knowledge base is, but it's the knowledge base that our teachers have that make them patient, right? Because they understand child development, they understand what's going on with this child, they understand what's going on with this family. And for us to pretend that you can be in a classroom working with children from a different culture than your own, a different community of your own, who speak a different language, who might have a disability or whatever, based on a high school diploma and 6 credit hours and, you know, that you took an early, is criminal. And we have to at one point say that, no, this is an expertise that's needed, and there's a reason why we need scholarship programs that not only support people to get a BA degree, but support people to get a BA degree, to get licensure, and to get those additional credentials in bilingual and working with dual language learners and working with kids with special needs. There is a massive knowledge base to do this work well, and we are not going to reap the benefits that early childhood promises, like $7 for every dollar you spent, if we don't make sure that the people in front of our children have this expertise and this knowledge base.